Firstly, thank you all for being here. It's a small but perfectly formed group of people to be discussing the race to space. We have a really interesting set of contributors to create the debate around the race to space. But before I say anything by way of framing this conversation, it gives me a great privilege to introduce Luca Parmitano. As you can see, the man is dressed in purpose because he's been up there. He's been up there several times. So I think before I say anything, I want to hand over to him because he has a unique perspective because he's been up there, but also to share what the opportunities and the learnings he's gleaned from his experience. Luca, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for your attention and your time today. It might surprise you that today I'm not here to take you to space, but I will actually lead you through a tour of the Earth from space, as seen from space. The European Space Agency and all the other agencies do a lot for our planet by sending free data to the ground for scientists to monitor the state of our planet. But I'm not here to talk about satellites because how much they do, it's already known. But what do we do as astronauts? How can we help the world? How can we help leaders understand the urgency that's ongoing right now regarding our common starship and only planet? Hopefully, I can give you a little bit of a, is this the? I'm just gonna go and, yeah, because this is not my presentation. My presentation is the one with the pictures of space. I can leave this picture up for the whole day, and I'm happy for that.
Everyone's running around trying to get this going. Whilst we're waiting, why don't you just it's come on.
There we go. That's the one. Thank you. Little bit of humor. So, as I said at the beginning, a little bit of a journey around the planet Earth. And now it doesn't go around. Next. We should have rehearsed this a little better.
As I said in the morning session, you have to be a bit more patient with us as we're dealing with...
There we go. There we go. Okay. So, let's see if it... Okay, it works. As you all know, our planet is getting hotter, like a fever. And nobody more than the younger people in this room can be more interested in trying to take down the fever. And I want to show everybody why it is so important, because this atoll in the Pacific Ocean is only a few inches, or for us Europeans, a few centimeters above the water level. This is already an image of the past, because whatever we do now, if we stopped everything we're doing in terms of CO2 emissions, for the next 40 years, the water is going to rise and this atoll is going to disappear. If you've never been to the Maldives, these are all pictures that I took myself during Mission Beyond, 200 days in orbit. They are a magnificent show from below and from above. But if you've never been, you might want to go there now because they're also destined to disappear. This is in the Yucatan, just in front of the coast of Mexico. And you can see, I don't really have the words to describe the beauty. I can only tell you that what I'm showing you is a pale image compared to what we actually see with our own eyes, especially for those privileged enough to do it in a spacewalk. Rising waters are not the only element of danger to our planet. You probably have heard a lot about the Amazon fires. You heard a lot about the bushfires. I will show you pictures of that. These are in these fires that I'm showing in this picture. Obviously, this doesn't work, but these are not clouds. These are all fires man-made fires in Eastern Africa, where people are desperate enough for water, food, resources, that they have to burn the forest in order to gain access to those resources. People are desperate because the distribution of resources is not even. There are some places that use a lot of resources and some that have the resources but don't have access to them. So people burn forests to gain access to the ground so that they can make farms for us to enjoy our food. And then what happens? It's a vicious circle, unfortunately. The more forests we burn, the less water we have over those areas, the more the deserts get drier, and then we see storms like this one that covers hundreds of miles in Central Africa. It's a beautiful picture. As you can see, the swirl created by the wind. 70% of the dirt around the world comes from Africa, comes from the Sahara Desert. If you've ever seen your car covered in dirt, that's where it comes from. This is over Iran, and you can see the extension of this desert storm. Sorry, that was Central Africa. The next one is Iran. And then talking back about the consequences. Here we are in Australia. You probably remember in 2020, in the beginning of 2020, we talked a lot about the bushfires in Australia. What's not as known as well is that we were in orbit taking pictures of the bushfires since September. We saw it burning for 4 months, taking pictures like this. This is a single fire with clouds extending for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. And for 4 months, we saw this continent becoming red with ashes and dust, because again, when it doesn't rain and when we burn, when everything burns, we create a lot of sand. And this is a sandstorm over Australia. You can imagine the extension just by looking at the size of the picture. That's the horizon and the curvature of the Earth. The Amazon are famous, the Amazon fires. Despite what any politicians might be saying around the world, the Amazon fires are real. We photograph them, we see them, and there's no doubt that it's happening. In the 6 years in between my 2 flights, I flew the first time in 2013 and the second time in 2019. In the 6 years, I saw an incredible transformation where entire regions of the Amazon that used to be forest are now cultivated land, are now farms. All those dots, those are fires, and they are visible from 420 kilometers of altitude. So you can imagine how big they are and the extension. That 6 years ago, that patch used to be forest, and now it's farmed land. Again, these people are not evil, but they are fighting something that we gave them. We gave them desperation, we gave them poverty, and they're trying to gain their capability to live the same level of life. So it is a question of distribution of resources. More pictures of fires and why. You see how little of forest is around and how much of it is being transformed into farmed lands. And then we've tried to fight the desertification with other systems. Now, this is something that we can address in 2 different ways. Technology can help us. So the technologies that we often develop in spaceflight have to do with utilize the resources that we have. So we recycle 95% of our water on orbit. Yes, we do drink our urine, everybody's urine. We collect it, we recycle it. The coffee that comes out yellow after we drink it is transparent again 10 days later, and we drink it again and make more coffee with it. But those resources, that technology is reusable. We can import it on the ground and use it to populate areas that otherwise would be inaccessible. And the coffee is delicious, by the way. Urbanization. This used to be a desert. We are, as you can see in this picture, these are beautiful, beautiful areas. I love the interaction of water and sand, but you can see how the urbanization is growing. What used to be a desert is now a tourist resort famous all over the world. But human action and human presence changes the environment. In the previous picture, you can see how the water and the flow of the water and the currents are affected by what we build. Everything we do changes the environment, changes the capability and access to resources. I love this picture. When I took this picture, I was super proud. I'm Italian, just in case you didn't see from my accent and from my flag. And I come from right here, the brightest spot in Sicily. Very proud, Catania. But then I have to wonder, if the lights are to illuminate what we do on the ground, why do we see so much of it from above? These are wasted resources. Not only we are polluting the visibility of the night for those who live off looking at the sky, not just streamers, but astronomers, astrophysicists. That's their job, to look at the sky and understand the universe. We have been polluting our sky with lights that are wasted resources. A lot of these lights, a lot of that could be solved with technology. Lights that work better, pointing at the ground, that have less reflection, but also we could also maybe use a little bit more diligence in turning off our lights. I keep telling my daughters, but not just to save on my bill, which helps too, but also because I want to give them a little bit of that urgency. Turn the lights. Every time you leave a light on, we are doing some damage, and a little bit of that discipline. So it's a cultural change, and it's also a technology change that we have to enact. How can we make that lights more effective? Maybe only when we walk into the room, like many buildings, or maybe we can turn off the lights in the big buildings, office buildings that we often see illuminated through the night. And here, another cultural reference. The reason why I put this picture is because what I'm showing here, I'm going to get on this side. This is Pyongyang. This is South Korea. And this is North Korea. As you can see, one more time, the distribution of resources. There is obviously a huge imbalance in the way things are between countries that are basically one country, but divided. Politics, culture, and human presence change the world all the time. I have to go fast, otherwise I'll run out of time. But this beautiful picture that looks like a palette for an artist, these are mines. We go, as humans, we go everywhere. This dry lake is mined to extract salt from the water. From space, it looks like a beautiful picture. It looks like an abstract painting. But what we're looking at is how we humans can impact the environment no matter where. In the middle of the desert in Patagonia, we are there to take the resources. And I'll talk more about resources in a second. Water exploitation, here we are in the I think it's Crimea. I couldn't find the georeference. It's really hard to pinpoint a location when you're traveling at 28,000 kilometers per hour, or 8 kilometers per second. We have a map, but really there's nobody to ask where we are. So we try to figure it out. I believe this is Crimea. As you can tell, also these very pretty pictures with pretty color is another example of how we affect everything we do. And then what are some of the results? How do I prove that what we do has any impact on the environment? Well, I don't need to prove it because nature is proving it to us. 6 years ago, when I was on the space station the first time, I took pictures and videos of phenomena that we are all used to. Rain, flooding, hurricanes. And then in 2019, I saw this one. Hurricane Dorian, the first recorded hurricane, category 5 hurricane in history. I took this picture staring down the eye. And this picture, taken from the space station, occupied the entire horizon visible from the space station, 6,000 kilometers. If you can imagine looking down from a space station and only see one hurricane, it really gives you a sense of impotence, of incapabilities. We can do nothing to protect ourselves, and the trail devastation left by Dorian is still documented, and we took a lot of pictures of it for that. On here, in what looks like another abstract painting, this is a flooding, the White Nile. The black part is the Nile, and then we have the flooding in yellow. This is a picture taken with the reflected light, with the glint. And actually, humans are really good at capturing such things, sometimes better than satellites. My boss, my director, used to be in charge of Earth observation in Esrin. Now he's in charge of everything, including me. So I hope he doesn't fire me for saying that. Sometimes we are better than satellites, but at least we capture something with our own eyes, and we are the only ones that can transmit and attach an emotion to the pictures. I love this picture because it's in Patagonia, Torre del Spine, one of the areas with more glaciers. Through our satellites, we can monitor 54 parameters, and we have been collecting data for 40 years over these 54 parameters for 35,000 glaciers. They're all telling us one thing. They're all shrinking. They're all going down. They're all getting smaller. This summer, I was on one glacier for 4 days. In those 4 days, in the Alps, that glacier went down 40 centimeters. In 4 days, 40 centimeters. In 20 years, 80 meters in height. Imagine the volume when you multiply those 20 meters for 4, 5, 6, 8 kilometers. The amount of water that the glacier has lost. This is a picture of the past because those glaciers will disappear in the next 40 years. I tried to stay within my timing. I believe that was all I was allotted. I hope that I gave you a sense of the urgency of our common starship. I hope I can give you a little bit more of the emotions that we astronauts feel when we go to space. I hope that I convinced you that what we do in space is valuable, not just for this, but also for all the science, the research, and the technology that we employ, develop, and give to the rest of the humanity. Thank you very much for your attention.
Luca, thank you so much, and you really privileged us and honored us because you didn't do this kind of romantic thing, Star Wars, but actually you gave us a salutary wake-up call about what's actually happening to our planet, and it's there's an incontrovertibility about what you're saying, and what occurs to me is that wouldn't it be great if you could be kind of beamed into every school across Europe so that you could give that talk to our younger generations, because I think everyone, but particularly those generations who will be inheriting our planet, ought to hear what you've just said, because that will affect their decision-making and their political choices, hopefully, because actually this generation is not changing that much and as speedily as it should do. But so I'm very grateful to you, and I hope you do get invited to hundreds of schools across Europe, because what you're saying is extremely important. And thank you for that. And I think we'll never think about coffee again in the same way. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yeah, let's not go there. Let's not go there. I don't want to know. But thank you. Coffee was enough of an impact. So thank you so much for that. Now, can I invite our panelists to join me here to engage in our conversation now? Please. So we've had, obviously, from Luca, obviously that very, very palpable sense of the speed at which change is happening to our planet. We want to have a conversation about what we've called race to space. Those of you here will know that it's become highly strategic. We know that especially in the past 18 months, most of the superpowers have launched rockets and are basically fighting for airspace, ironically, and trying to create the best technological capacity, stations and observation capacities, but also satellite capacity in a way that we've never imagined 10 years ago. It's literally been, ratcheted up in the past 3 years. We have been really proud and pleased to be able to work with the European Space Agency. been really good to have Josef here. We've been working with him prior to him becoming the big boss of you and others, to develop our thinking around how can a think tank in its role really create value and add value to critical thinking around the purpose of space and its future of space. And so we're really pleased that we're able to announce with you, Josef, our new space program, Making Space Matter. And I think we're the only think tank in the world with such a program of its kind, so we're really pleased to be able to partner with you on it. But that's the advert over, but it's meaningful, I assure you, because what we are trying to do is create policy value as to what are the deliberations that we should be thinking of. So Josef, I want to, we've spoken a lot prior to you becoming the top boss, but also when you became the top boss. And you said a number of things in that conversation. And one was that, and it's become kind of quite famous in different ways, is that, the space is like, the Wild West to a certain extent. And I know that you won't regret those phrases because it's been quoted to me several times, just shows you many people watched it. Where, given where we find ourselves now, where when you look around globally, where do you think we find ourselves now? And what do we need to do, for Europe not to lose the obvious assets and advantage it has already acquired?
So thank you, Dharmendra, and just still impressed by the talk of Luca, looking at our planet and the beauty and fragility of our planet, and it's always impressive to hear that. And that's exactly why we should look at space from different angles. Luca has just explained to us how he sees space from a space station as an astronaut, but space has so many facets and so many aspects and is there in daily life. Many people don't even know that they are using satellites every single day, every single minute, and if you would switch them off, your life would be very different, if not say devastating, because there are many things that just wouldn't work. But your question, Dharmendra, on where does Europe stand space globally? Actually, it's good news and bad news. The good news is that in some domains, Europe has acquired global leadership. And I'm mentioning space science, for example, on exploring the universe. Some of our satellites, Gaia, to mention one, is producing some of the highest, if not the highest, number of scientific publications. That means the data from our satellites and our scientists produce top science, Nobel Prize winners included, in order to better understand the universe and where we come from. Another example is Galileo. We have the most precise navigation signal today, 50 to 75 centimeters of accuracy, which is much better than any other system, either in the US, China, or anywhere else. So there we have a global leadership. Another example is the one very close to what Luca was mentioning, Earth observation. Europe today has the best Earth observation program. Copernicus, but also the Earth Explorer missions and the Meteor missions. They're the best, they're the gold standard. And it actually leads to the fact that NASA is a junior partner on some of our missions, Central 6 as one example. And this is very rare, believe me, that NASA is not the dominating partner, because NASA in general spends much more in space. In other domains, we have lost leadership. I'm very sorry to say. Rockets, you hear it and you see it all day, every day in the news. Don't need to mention the names, but you know it. Broadband internet from space. Europe doesn't have a capability today. Starlink is being built up and is dominating already the market, and we are still very far away. And there are some other domains. Space exploration is something where we have excellent capability, very good, but if I tell you that Europe spends 8% of NASA in space exploration, you see how much we do with very little money. So what I'm saying is that Europe is good in some domains, but in some domains we are not at the same level. And why do I say that? Because on one side, space globally is becoming extremely important. Look at the United States, look at China, they're building up capacities. In fact, they use space really to cement their superpower status economically and politically. And I think it is fair to say that if you're not a space superpower, you cannot be a world superpower. But the GDP of Europe is the same more or less as China and the US. So why is Europe in space so much behind in some of the elements? Because we spend publicly, from public money in space, about 1/6 of what is spent in the US, 1/6 to 1/7. But still we have some leadership programs, as I say. And I see space a bit at a crossroad, because we are at a stage where we have excellence, but we need to make a decision, and this is not necessarily me as the head of ESA, this is politicians who need to make a decision where do we want to go. And these are strategic political decisions where we need the force of Europe to say, yes, this is fundamental, we need to invest, otherwise we are thrown out of the race. And if I say thrown out of the race, I mean it serious. In IT, 15, 20 years ago, when the IT was in a phase where really information technology was converted from brain into money, Europe had more or less the same level of intelligence, capacities, expertise as the US, Japan, China, or others. But we did not manage to create the biggest companies in the world out of IT. All the Googles and Facebooks and Apples and all these companies are not in Europe, which is a pity, because we missed to convert this intelligence which we have in Europe into market opportunities. And I think this is a message I'm giving on space. Today in space, we are maybe 20 years later in this cycle, and if we are not investing today significantly, we will be thrown out of the race, just as it happened in IT or in artificial intelligence or quantum computing or other domains. And this is a risk I see as a strategic element of space for society. Of course, space serves so many people and so many domains. Daily life has an inspirational aspect, astronauts, human spaceflight, Mars, Moon. Of course, these are elements that everyone wants to address as well. So there are different aspects. But my plea really is, and this is something I've expressed very clearly in a document called Agenda 2025, which I put on the table on my very first day as Director General of ESA, which says that Europe is at a crossroads, and if we are not realizing where we are, and that means making decisions by politicians to invest further, we will lose out, and I do not want Europe to lose out. We have opportunities, we have capacities, and we can do it.
Thank you. That was, and thank you for being so candid about what both the opportunity, but the significant political challenge. Given what we've been hearing in the opening session around, and what we've heard from Luca also, that we've got this kind of the climate crisis, we've got a digitalization potential crisis if we don't manage it effectively. We know, and you know this, and those ESA knows this so well, space has the unique comparative advantage to solving and helping us solve and respond to some of our planet's biggest challenges, right? Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. What do we need to do in Europe to kind of almost not necessarily knock heads together, but what kind of support do you need, or what do we need to do with other space agencies or member states to actually say, wake up, and as they say, smell the coffee, about the fact that there's an opportunity here that could really advance economic growth, but most importantly, tackle two of our biggest challenges, which is climate change and digitalization.
No, thank you. I think this is exactly what Europe is very good at, to use space for its people and its citizens. And Europe has classically built up programs that are what we call application programs for its people. And we had a very intense reflection over summer with previous ministers responsible for space, with some other key people. We call them a group of wise people, which have advised me as Director General on what and how we should really make best use of space for our people. One message they gave me is that space is completely underutilized across the world, but also in Europe. There's so much more we could do with space for daily life. But also, and this is really the essence of this report, which I'm discussing with my member states next week, is that they have encouraged me to propose what we call accelerators. Accelerators which are the beginning of future major programs, or you probably could call them flagship at one point, but not yet. Accelerators that are using space much more intensely for the purpose of citizens. And there are three domains identified, which are the first ones, the urgent ones to tackle. Number one, climate change. And climate change meaning helping countries to decarbonize and help them in their decisions to become carbon neutral by 2050, as most countries have agreed to. Number two is using space for rapid and resilient response in case of crisis. We have flooding, we have seen some of it by Luca, we have fires, we have storms, we have all kinds of crises caused again by climate change to a large extent, In those crises, you need quick help. You need to know what is the situation, you need communication links that work, and you need to help people to deal with the crisis, but also in the aftermath to clean up and to help people to assess what the various elements are. Ideally, also to help predicting some of the oncoming crises to prepare people better to reduce damages and cost of lives. And number three, if we build up, and we already have a system of satellites that protects us and we are using in daily life, we have to protect these satellites in orbit from debris, from collisions, from sun flares, and so on. And this is also an obvious activity where we need to reinforce. So these are the three so-called accelerators, which I would like to discuss with my member states in detail. And then we have two inspirators, because they are inspiring people. One is human spaceflight, seeing how astronauts can explore our universe and learn from the space station, but in a second step, Moon and eventually Mars. And another inspirator is to actually ask the question, where do we come from? And is there life out there? And what I mean here is actually quite fascinating. An idea which we have developed is to design a mission to an icy moon of Jupiter, because astrobiologists tell me if there is somewhere life out there, outside this planet, you might find some kind of life, even very primitive, under an icy moon, because they are covered by an ice crust, and then underneath there's water, and there might be very primitive life out there, bacteria, microbes, of course we do not know. If there is life somewhere, then you find it there. So the challenge would be to launch a spaceship, going to an icy moon, Enceladus is a prime candidate, have a lander landing on this icy moon, Enceladus, digging into the ice cover, drilling into it, taking a sample, bring it back up with an ascent model to space, bring it back to Earth, and then analyze it on the laboratories. And then just imagine you find life first, or you don't find life. Already this is an answer. And if you do find life, I have the same as we have. Or, or are there other ones out there? Is there a common origin somewhere else where both of this comes from? So really the question is there life out there? And I think this question to be answered is of course very challenging. And this is one of the inspirators which I also would like to discuss with my member states.
Joseph, thank you. And just listening to you makes us remember all the space films that we've been watching. My goodness, you bring it to life. You really do. Thank you. And there are dimensions that I'm sure that people will raise are about warfare, security, and not only just the climate challenges, but and the social challenges, and digitalization. But there's something about what we do about peace, security, and defense in the future. But I'll bring you back on that in a moment. And we also, I know, we have one of our senior fellows who's an expert in that field that I'll bring into this conversation, because I think we mustn't lose, as you've said, it is highly strategic, but it encompasses every aspect of the human problem that we have on this planet, and which is untapped. But thank you for that. And you've also got a summit coming up in April, I believe, or so, which will be an interesting thing to touch upon towards the end of this conversation. Bring you on that. Susmita, can I bring you in now? You've been working internationally. You've seen, for good and bad, different experiences of governments and the governance around space exploration, etc. From your perspective, share with us, from where you sit, you've created this wonderful organization, Earth to Orbit. When you're kind of listening to what you've heard from Joseph, what's your perspective in terms of the EU's potential actual role in terms of geopolitics in relation to space?
Thank you, Dharmendra. I think to contextualize my responses, I should just quickly share with the audience here that I have, over the last 25 years, worked with the Americans, the Europeans, the Japanese, the Indians, in various capacities. I started off with NASA and Boeing, and over the last 20 years, I've co-founded companies on 3 different continents. First San Francisco, then Vienna, and then Bangalore. So the response to your question, I think, will come from my collective experience and exposure. The world we currently inhabit, geopolitically speaking, there are 3 trends that I see. One is what I would call anti-intellectualism and the rise of what we call unicornism. So this race to becoming an IPO, a unicorn, is become more pressing than having intellectual debates. And I have been inhabiting the space world for almost 25 years. So that's one trend that I see now, especially in California and across the world. Second is that of unilateralism. What we saw in Afghanistan is also starting to happen in the space world, if you ask me. If a single private company can throw up 42,000 satellites without any serious questioning or debate around how this is allowed, it's in my view, space being a shared commons, it is a kind of a land grab, as would have happened in the colonization 1.0, if you ask me. So I think this whole thing about unilateral, even legislation. In 2015, the United States Congress passed a law which allows American companies to go out and bring back material from the moon, from asteroids, and own them. Similarly, Luxembourg passed a law in 2017, I think, around asteroid mining. We also have the United Arab Emirates, which has got a fledgling space program, which is very seriously discussing how to regulate space resource mining. So I think first is anti-intellectualism, second being unilateralism, and the third trend, so to speak, that we see around us, both in space and politics, is that of, whenever it comes to making a choice between the moral compass and the market will always win. It has been winning, right? So now let me try and tackle the question that Dharmendra asked of me. So where do I see the European Union playing a role, given the state of affairs? One, I think, I'm pretty sure some of the European countries are going to be part of the Artemis Accords that the United States will lead. It is, if those of you are not familiar with it, it's a new program where we will have an orbiting station around the moon. We will also have human presence on the moon, and that will most certainly bring up questions of space resources, both access and ownership. So I would love for Europe to take a leadership role as an environment, watchdog of sorts, where we make sure that we go beyond the Outer Space Treaty, which is very inadequate. The Outer Space Treaty was written in 1967. The objective was to try and not nuclearize the world. It doesn't have any real provisions to regulate access and ownership of resources. So I think EU as a collective could lead the crafting of these enforceable laws, with some foresight, of course. The second role that I see EU could play as a collective of nations, and I think having worked in California for about 12 years and having had a company in Vienna for 17 years, I can tell you that there are times when I know there are constraints within a collective like ESA, where you have member states and there has to be consensus and all of that. But I do wish, I mean, this is a wish from an international lens, I do wish Europe would take more of a leadership position, and whether it's human exploration or otherwise, not necessarily piggyback on NASA. I've always wanted Europe to have its own space transportation system. The reason I say this is because, to me, interplanetary travel is no different from intercontinental travel. Tomorrow, how is Europe going to transport itself to Moon or Mars or wherever? I mean, even India, we are developing our own human transportation system. So transportation is basic to the future. You have to look 50 years from now, not 5, not 10. So Europe needs to have its own transportation system, not rely on NASA, not rely on Russia. And I know you had the Hermes program, which was shelved. I know Europe was part of the Crew Return Vehicle program with NASA, which was scrapped. I was in the US when all this was happening. So I think I would love to see EU think about space transportation in addition to space applications. It is going to decide the balance of who will drive the space narrative for the next century. And I think lastly, I would like to say that, again, from a geopolitical standpoint, just as big tech, whether it's Facebook or Google or Amazon, we will need regulations with big tech in space. And sooner than later. Those of you who've seen, the billionaires who are already in this race of one-upmanship. On one hand, what happened in July with Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin doing their first commercial flights is a marquee moment in terms of space access. But if you look at it from another angle, it also reeks of a very egocentric, narcissistic, no-holds-barred takeover of space. So I think that's my response to your geopolitical.
Wow, all I can say, thank you so much, because you've kind of, it's really informative, and I love the way in which you have, I suppose, structured the intellectual thinking around what's happening and its implications for space. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions to you as a result. And I think what you're saying is very much in harmony with, I suppose, some of the frustrations that I'm sure that Josef has experienced, but he can't possibly say because he's a political person now. But thank you for saying it in that way. And I say that with all goodwill, Josef, obviously. I'm going to move to our next contributor. Masami, I'm really pleased you could join us. Can I see, can we see you on screen? Hello.
Hello, Dharmendra and everybody.
Can we hear you?
I can hear you.
You're very faint. Can our technical colleagues sort this out, please? Hello?
Hello? Yes. Do you hear me? I hear you very well.
I know you can hear possibly us very well, but we just can't hear you very well, unfortunately.
Oh, this is a problem.
That's
Can you fix
better.
that?
Great, you're with us. Excellent.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Masami, for joining us. And obviously, again, you've been a contributor to some of our discussions on our new program, Making Space Matter. You've heard just from Susmita about the issue in a nutshell about values and the importance of values determining our approach to the future development of space and space exploration. From your perspective, where you sit, I think you're part of the Artemis program too in Japan. But what's your sense about the potential, given your relations with other large players, about the whether the values agenda is really going to matter or not?
Yes, thank you, Dharmendra, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you, even from inside this little frame. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And so we talked about values. Strong values are indeed shared by Japan, North America, and EU. And it is also important that we share these values in outer space by conducting our activities in a responsible manner. So we talked about the Artemis program, which is an international space exploration program, as Susmita just introduced, to send humans to the moon, Mars, and beyond. And international partners are moving forward while ensuring that we all share these important values together. And so I am from the Japanese space agency called JAXA. And I am now located in DC, so I'm calling in 6 a.m. now in DC.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for having me. And also I've spent some years in Europe as well, and worked for a very long time with ESA and our colleagues at the European Space Agency. And from that viewpoint, I think Europe really has an opportunity here. Because no single country now can do this alone. And also, I'm so many times being in this position in Washington, D.C., from Japan, asked, why do we have to go to the moon now, after 50 years, again? And to answer this question, I always say the stark difference from last time and this time in 50 years is that last time you did not have me. I mean, have us, have Japan, or have Europe, or the other partners. You didn't have us, and this time you do. And this also comes from a recent film that somebody might have seen, but if you haven't seen that, anyway, this is something that I always tell people. And this time it's a stark difference. And so with this, we have to work together multilaterally. And in that, I think Europe really has a good position, a great experience in working all together and making this happen. So that said, the Artemis Accords that was just mentioned is a political declaration so far signed by 12 countries, and let me see if I can say this correctly: Australia, Brazil, Canada, Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, New Zealand, Republic of Korea, Ukraine, UAE, UK, USA are the 12 countries. And this describes a shared vision for principles to govern the civil exploration and use of outer space. And so also further technologies and governance systems for the safe and sustainable use of outer space, including technologies such as space debris removal or space situational awareness, will become an increasingly important agenda in areas from Earth to cislunar space. So I think when we talk about values, we particularly have to try to have a set of agreed principles as we go out to space, need agreed rules, and for even-handed access and exploitation of the space resources and the space environment and activities. So this is where we have to work together, and I think Europe has a great opportunity. Thank you.
Masami, thank
Masami,
you.
thank you. Those are fine words, but at the end of the day, and I go back to the quote from Joseph, it's the Wild West in the sense that actually there's no regulation. Most of it's out of date. No one's going to be the arbiter unless you say otherwise. And values might matter at the end of the day, even in Europe. Look what's happening with the Union, in terms of certain member states. So there's something about the fact that we've learned so much so far. What do you hold on to give you hope and confidence that we're going to be different in terms of what we're doing, because our current multilateral arrangements are not worth a jot in space, in reality. I know it's a tough question.
Yeah, I love that. I don't think it's not worth a jot. The UN, for instance, is may not be perfect, but we cannot expect the UN to be able to be in front of every new idea and technology all the time. And their role is to bring all of us together and to build a consensus. And in this, being not so fast is not always a bad thing. And I think there is a role of the UN and also the existing organizations that we already have in hand to play in the efforts that we're trying to do. And what we need to do, though, is to effectively feed into them. And I think efforts are ongoing in many different fora. For instance, for space debris, we have a body called Confirst. That's a body of us space agencies talking also with mainly the industry to talk about best practices, what we can do. So these kind of best practices, behaviors are something that will complement this. And altogether, I think we're struggling to be different from before and to find a different new governance system.
Sure. No, I get that. I suppose in my mind what's ringing is the fact that there are two fat billionaires who are basically creating the rules of the game, and we won't be fast enough. While we talk about best practice, we're not really learning from what's happened in the past 24 months, where we need to, as we said in the opening plenary, really change the model of our collaboration. And on that point, I want to move to Anna, if I may. Thank you, Masami, and thank you for being up so early. But I will come back to you. I'm really pleased to have Anna. Anna, I want to bring in that kind of member state perspective in this, and for you to kind of express your views on this debate, particularly in terms of what do you see the role of the member state, if you like, in this wider jigsaw that we see ourselves within, in terms of whether it's governance, competition, capacity and capability to tackle the twin challenges of digital and climate change?
Thank you so much, and been working in this space area for more than 30 years and follow the development. And I think that I think what we are having in Europe is that we have a lot of very competent member states within space, and a lot of things is ongoing. And of course, and you know, when we talk also about the space business in general, say now the commercial is coming and is more and more commercial, but it's true on one side. At the same time, it's a lot of institutional money that is needed for the first part of the development. So I know from some facts from OECD that there was, you say that the money that was in the space and the profit was more than 300 billion of euros, but in that you have put in 70 billion of euros to make that happen. So I usually call this areas semi-commercial. And I think it's very good that the different countries have its own competence in certain areas, because then they are open to collaborate and to compete and to become even much better in the areas. And if you look at lot of different areas, there's also, we have been talking a little bit about launches before. And of course, I think it's extremely important that we have European independent access to space, as you said before also. And I don't think any member states would like to do that by themselves, but we should at the same time embrace new initiatives coming. Say we have these big launches, but now we have these micro launches, and they are trying to be competitive and make a lot of commercial business with some support of institutional money. So let them help us to make that happen. So I think that, and if we can do that more together, I think we'll be more competitive also to the rest of the world. And why should we be competitive? Is because then we are more innovative, and also we can make the resources even better, because why are we doing this? It's not just for fun. You know, it's actually that we are trying to build up different tools and systems in the space that can help us to know how our Earth is really the state of the Earth right now. And we need to have that. So I think it's a lot of very positive things in connection here. And what I've been working for a long time is also because space is not just for fun. You launch a rocket and you make something very exciting. That is, of course, marvelous. But that's not the real thing. The real thing is the horizontal. What we can give, the information that we can give from space and what we can provide is of uses for all the political areas. And at least in Sweden, where I come from, it's difficult to convince the politicians the real importance, the strategic importance of that. It's easier, as I'm the chair as the ESA Council. I think there in some countries you can see that they are more knowledge about that. But that's a hard thing. And
I see. So, I mean, in terms of, you have these accounts, so you have other CEOs like yourself of national space agencies. Do you see the sense of urgency or the coming together? Can you actually put your hands on and sense that actually there's movement taking place? Are your fellow colleagues in the kind of CEO world of space agency moving in that direction, do you feel?
In which direction?
In terms of moving into kind of wanting to think about governance and having some much more collaborative efforts, trying to kind of do things that we've talked about in terms of tackling the climate change agenda and from a member state perspective, but actually doing that in a collaborative fashion with other space agencies.
I think it's the willingness of collaboration is really high, especially if you have a very specific goal to go on. And I think we have several within ESA. There are several very important goals or missions that we are working with. So that's good. But I think also it's quite a different balance between collaboration and get all secure to do that, but also to really all be on the edge to try to be better and to contribute and to really do the most important thing and to achieve that for the climate and everything like that. And that is one other thing I think is important is about risk-taking and failures. Because this is, to work in space and do things for space is difficult, and that's why everyone loves it, I believe. But it's also, you have to dare to take risk, because this is difficult. And I mean, if you do that, you also have to accept failures. You can look at SpaceX. They say, oh, for each time they fail to land, you know, this reusable stage, they said, oh, now we're getting closer. We're getting closer. I think it was 13 times they tried to really land this reusable stage before they succeeded. And they say, oh, now we are there. Yes. And I don't think we can do that in Europe. Not at all. I think, and also I think, why should we take risk? Because if you look at a system or a satellite or whatever, if you know the system well, you know where you can take shortcuts. And you can maybe, for example, if you look at components, you can have, if you can make it off the shelf, you can make a delivery much quicker, you can make it much cheaper, cost efficient, you make it lighter, and maybe it's fulfill your purposes. Or you can't do that at all because this mission is going to the icy moons of Jupiter. Then you have to really have the high quality, and it takes more time. So I think you have to have this overall feeling for the whole system.
Let's hope. Let's see what happens in the next year, in particular, around this agenda. I want to introduce my co-moderator, Amanda, at the back there, who, again, similarly as in the first session, is looking after our Zoom audience. And welcome to those of you who have joined us on Zoom. And thank you very much for being here with us, Amanda. We have contributions or questions.
Thank you, Dharmendra. No idea. But I'll bring in, there we go. Our first virtual participant is Avi Papantoniou, coming from the European Commission, who would like to come in. Avi?
Hello, can you hear me?
All good.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for giving me the floor, and actually thank you for the excellent participants to this Race to Space panel. This is very topical, the topic that you have chosen. I would like a couple of comments from the European Commission point of view. I'm working on space policy, of course, always working very closely with the European Space Agency in complementarity roles. I would say that finally, space to the broader public, it is really obvious that it is not only about Star Wars, it's not about science fiction, it is something that is something practical, that space solutions changes lives. We cannot live without the satellites, actually. And this is indeed actually the approach that we took from the European Union point of view. Josef mentioned already the European success story, Galileo, the best actually satellite navigation system, but also Copernicus, the Earth observation that is helping globally through the Earth observation, all the crises that we have related to climate change. But it's true now in the current geopolitical context, people have realized that actually space is a strategic domain. It was mentioned that it was a global common. And we realize that space data and space services can actually play a crucial role to Europe's renaissance, in particular to recovery for a sustainable growth. In particular in the COVID crisis also, where we need to be resilient as economy and also be non-dependent from the third countries. Strategic autonomy has been, although it's not an easy subject for all European countries, but we are becoming more and more conscious that we need to have a certain level of independence, although space is a truly cooperative sector in which all of us, we need to join forces. From the European Union point of view, we are very well aware of the challenges. It was mentioned by you, the billionaires, for example, in the US, that have really changed the paradigm. And from the European Commission point of view, and my commissioner, Breton, what is clear is that we really need to change the way we make business in space. In the European, as Anna also mentioned, we really need to have a more risk-taking approach, where we need to anticipate and to better mitigate the risks. With the tools that we have, the available tools, working in a smart way, because of course we cannot copy and paste the American model. This is not possible, but still we have some significant assets, and we are here to foster more entrepreneurship, more risk-taking approach, leveraging the private resources, because investing in space is not only investing by the public, it's also that we have to do it hand in hand with the private sector, and of course have more innovative approach and more disruptive innovation. So we have some tools also from the European point of view. throughout research programs, throughout InvestEU programs, so that we will really turbo boost and then mobilize the resources so that we can have finally this more risk-taking, more test and fail approach that also Anna was saying in the future. And last but not least, we do appreciate, we all agree that actually space transportation and independence in this space transportation for Europe is key, and this is something that we are actually working with all relevant European stakeholders together. Thank you.
No, thank you for, you've obviously set out your statement from the Commission in terms of the issues that have been raised. But tell me this, we know that in terms of R&D intensity of GDP in Europe, we know we don't spend we don't even spend half of what the other big players are spending. And the fine words from Breton are absolutely right. He's someone that's navigating this in a really interesting way. But in reality, the investment you're making, or we're making, is so poor. It needs to be doubled, surely, if we're going to be in the same field as others. So it becomes fine words, actually, but won't be matched by the level of intensity of investment we need in R&D and innovation if we are. And then the other point that was made by Susmita is that Breton and his team, Team Europe, could actually lead the way to hatch not an American model, but an EU model of governance and lead in both the twin elements of both innovation R&D, but also governance. Where are you in that? I know it's challenging, but hey, you came in and you made the Commission statement, so I have to ask you.
I think it's a hard fact that nobody can question that European spending in R&D is very lower compared to our competitors, to our transatlantic friends. This is a hard fact. But let me also add another difficulty. Also, venture capital is like 5 times less investment in Europe, in Europe as compared to the US, because we don't have, so I think we are lagging behind in the 2 fronts, because certainly we need to set up investments in research and development, and this is not only, we have Horizon Europe, overall with a global 100 billion for this long-term budget period. It is not the only one, but then we have also national investments, and in particular in space, we have to combine, to be able to coordinate what at the national level is done by the national space agencies, by the European Space Agency, and by the European Union, so that we, in a smart way, we try to invest in the forefront technologies looking ahead. Certainly we need to step up, but more coordination also is key there, so that because we cannot match one-to-one what the Chinese actually are investing or the Americans are investing. But also, let me again underline the venture capital attitude that we do not have. Of course, we don't have a Silicon Valley. I had a question addressed to me on the chat, why we cannot do it the same as the Americans? Because we don't have the billionaires, and we don't have the risk-taking attitude that they have, nor the venture capital attitude. So I'm not very pessimistic in that sense that we are changing slowly mentalities, but I think this Commission, and in particular Commissioner Breton, he's really committed in really changing the way we do space business.
Okay. Let's see what our audience, other members of the audience make of what you're saying, because on the one hand there's the ambition of what Breton's saying, but in reality what you're saying is that we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the billionaires, and we don't have the Silicon Valley approach, and we don't have the venture capitalists. So go figure, what are we going to do then as a result? I know we've got a number of contributors. I have one more online contribution before I come back to various of you on the floor. Amanda?
Thanks, Dharmendra. I'd now like to bring in Amara Graps. Amara, please. Unmute yourself.
Hello. So I want to make a couple of quick points. One was about the regulatory framework in space resource utilization. When the Americans formed their 2015 Space Act, then Luxembourg followed, and I want to comment that Luxembourg is leading the world in space resource utilization community building, and they're gathering quite a lot of public-private partnerships that are addressing those kinds of activities. So there is a group in Leiden called the Hague Space Resources Governance Working Group, and this is in direct response to these individual countries that were declaring their own space law. And I see it as a supremely successful effort at gathering a worldwide community that addressed these main issues. Now, do they have the capability to fine bad actors? Well, no, not yet, but they laid out a framework for what you would do next. And I note that at the Space Resources Week in Luxembourg in April, there was a specific session on the results from this governance working group. So there is quite a lot of discussion and thinking about it. There still is not that big body that can find a company that acts badly in space, but there's discussion and movement towards that. So I would say that it's not just being ignored, it's quite concerning to a lot of people. And
Sure.
And then I want, okay, yeah?
Sorry,
We're going to say something?
No, not at all, because I need to move on. Thank you for making
okay.
that point. And
Okay.
I'm sorry I can't take your second one, but do add it to
Okay.
the chat. But
Okay.
you know, the point you make is that the question is, which multilateral institution should be taking
Right.
up this challenge? You know, really, which
Right.
one? And I'm not sure we can, you know, easily think actually it's that or the other. But we have a number of contributors. So Jamie, can I bring you in first? Please do introduce yourself.
Yeah, Dharmendra, thank you. Jamie Shea, the senior fellow here at Fresh Europe. We need the microphone, sorry. My stentorian voice is not up to the task any longer. First of all, thank you, panelists. Excellent discussion. I've taken voluminous notes. Two questions, if I may. You all identified the problem of traffic management in space as it becomes a more cluttered environment with more satellites going up and more old satellites and debris staying in orbit with the possibility of accidental or deliberate clashes and collisions. What are the prospects of some sort of international ITU telecommunications or airline traffic control sort of system emerging in the next few years, which could give the early warning, put in the traffic lights, put in the left and right hand lane driving routes, and what role can the EU play, not just in coming up with ideas of its own, which it always does, but in acting as a kind of convener for the rest of the world, or at least a bulk of the rest of the world, to bring them in around certain standards. Second question, when it comes to space as a more contested domain, are we now already seeing lots of disruptive activities up there? Threats, for example, from cyber hacking and penetration, jamming, spoofing, those kind of things. I know that European countries have been a bit worried that the Russians have been maneuvering some of their satellites in dangerous proximity. So how big a worry is it in terms of the security of the space-based assets? For example, European Space Agency, what kind of palliative measures to protect satellites you're able to take? Thank you, Dharmendra. Those would be my questions.
Very big and important questions. But before you sign off, just very briefly, Jamie, from your perspective, I mean, you're ex-NATO, you've been there. You've just referred, the second question about the security dimension. Briefly, what do you think are the kind of the urgent issues we need to attend to from a peace, security, defence perspective in terms of either a multilateral approach or something that Europe could do?
Well, I certainly think that there's a need to revise the Outer Space Treaty, which only prohibits weapons, you said this, weapons of mass destruction in space, and bring in a lot more type of military activity. Anti-satellite weapons, India also has joined the club of using anti-satellite, or at least testing anti-satellite weapons, I think would be probably the most urgent thing to do. The second thing is definition of an armed attack. NATO has extended its Article 5 collective security clause to things like terrorist attacks, cyber attacks, and now to space. But are we talking about the actual destruction of a satellite, 4 satellites, purely disruption, before we would declare that we are the victim of an aggression, and some response has to be provided. So I think that is the second thing. The third thing, and again, the panelists referred to this, is more and more of military operations are being guided from space. If you take the first Gulf War, in 1990, about 6% of the weapons used then were fired from space signals and satellites. By the time of the Second Gulf War, it was 65%. So you get the general trend. So as the military domain depends more and more on space, how can it make sure in terms of both assets but also arms control that it's able to preserve the essential functionality and prevent basically an arms race in space where we seem at the moment unfortunately to be heading. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, responding so quickly. Joseph, I will bring you in to respond to some of that. But André, again, introduce yourself and...
Yes, André Loesekrug-Pietri. First I wanted to commend the presentation by astronaut Luca. A question to you, all these points, you often pointed to technologies that are developed in space that could be useful, especially on climate topics and resource management. I would love to hear how this is very practically and urgently put into space. And the second thing, I cannot, it's a question to the panel, I cannot think that we seem in Europe to be focusing a lot on structures and not on the missions. And I'm wondering, how can we have an ecosystem approach? I mean, you have the ESA, you have the European Union, you have the National Space Agency, you have the whole new space ecosystem. I know the tensions that there are on space between France and Germany right now, which are more than tensions. How can we try to avoid it reminds me on the debate on AI. Since 3 years, we're thinking about the AI guidelines, and everybody is rushing ahead. And I have the feeling that we are focusing again, it's very French, by the way, I think French intoxicated too much the EU here, on the structures and the governance. Who cares? I'm sorry to say, who cares? Because at the end of the day, we won't have access to space, and I don't want to offend anybody by saying how many Falcon 9 have been launched this year and how many Ariane have been launched, or Vegas. So how can we have more this ecosystem approach? I'm happy to contribute modestly on that.
Indeed, I'm sure you've got views on it as well. Absolutely. Luca, do you want to come back to the point that was made about the, how do you bring some of that technology?
You're the moderator. You tell me what to do. So for the technology, the more we do, the more we get. It's a virtuous circle. The one I mentioned about reutilization of the water is obviously a very small example. But recently, we have improved from about 90% to 95% by adding, I don't want to disgust anybody here, but adding more capability of extraction from our urine byproducts. We used to destroy some of it, and recently we have added to our capability. Now, those are extreme situations. Obviously, on the space station, we really have little access to resources, but there are other places where such technology could be of use. I would say that the utilization of the sun as a source of energy is one of our main capabilities that we would like to export. Recently, my colleague and friend Thomas Pesquet has installed new solar panels on the space station. These solar panels are about 1/4 of the size of the original solar panels. They produce twice as much energy. It's technology that exists, but we are test bed for the capabilities. Finally, we have been upgrading the batteries of the space station. We went from nickel hydrogen to lithium-ion. Lithium-ion technology is improving, was recently awarded a Nobel Prize, and we are at the foreground for those technologies. Finally, the ones that I believe will give more impact are those that we are testing in terms of what can be done. And the space station is a laboratory where we test material engineering. We are capable of creating crystals that are not affected in their shape by microgravity. And recently, we have 2 3D printers on the space station that we want to use to 3D print tissues, organic tissues. One of them is European, one of them is from US. But if you can imagine 3D printing organic tissues on the space station, we are not affected by the acceleration of gravity. And that would be already, just imagine the consequences of such technology if we could improve on it, if we could make it even better. The last thing I want to talk about, since you mentioned resources, and I mentioned it several times, there is this idea that when we tend to use a lot the word exploitation, but I rather like the word utilization, because going to the moon or going to Mars or to an asteroid for science is of the utmost importance. We are, in the conversation, we always put the fact that for exploration, we don't want to create any, we don't want to invade with our own terrestrial objects anything while we're studying it. But humans utilize the territory, we change, we transform the world, and it doesn't mean that once we get there, we cannot touch anything. Utilization of lunar resources, asteroid resources, and Mars resources is important because, like I said in my presentation, we don't have a planet B, but resources out there are quite literally infinite, and we need to use them, utilize them, not exploit them, but utilize them so that we can protect the resources on the planet. And that's part of the technology that we need to improve on.
Luca, thank you for responding on the spot to that. That's really much appreciated. Before, I want to invite our contributors to kind of wrap up with some of their reflections, because again, time is of the essence. Before I do that, how quickly, because we have we've been consulting citizens, we've been accessing citizens about some of these debates. Can we pull up some of the quote cards from citizens? Is that possible, Amanda?
We have one queued up, in fact, which I think follows really directly on what Luca was saying just now. I'll just wait a second. I think it's coming up. It's a question from a comment from Christian in Sweden. So this gives us a little bit of a sense of what the citizens are thinking and how they are feeling about what we're discussing right now. Christian asks, how can we keep space exploration sustainable? It's difficult to imagine anything less sustainable than space tourism. Some food for thought. I'm not sure if the quote card will arrive or not.
Don't worry, you've said it, that's enough.
You've heard it.
Absolutely, thank you. So I'm going to now if there are no further questions, sorry, I had my back to you, I do apologize. Please, introduce yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Carine Claeys, Special Envoy for Space of the European External Action Service.
I wish I'd picked on you earlier. Excellent. Right. Go on.
I was on the wrong side of the room, obviously. Now, I wanted to intervene on one item. You rightly indicated, and several of you indicated, the importance of regulatory measures. And I think indeed that is very, very important. And in particular for the European Union. The European Union is a regulatory body. Initially, and we do quite a lot of other things also, but it is also our DNA, and another part of our DNA is multilateralism. So both the regulatory element inside of the EU, and I leave that more, of course, to my Commission colleagues, and also participation in the multilateral fora. And for the moment, there are important debates in the multilateral fora, both in Vienna, Copios, essentially, and in Geneva, New York, First Committee, so disarmament environment. And those are really important. We have the debate on the long-term sustainability of outer space, which is important with a working group being established. There is a new working group on space resources. So this debate starts. Of course, it takes some time. It's the UN, and in order to have all those people agreeing on something, it does take time. But the last 2 years, since 2019, and the adoption of the 21 guidelines on long-term sustainability, the ball is again rolling in the multilateral fora, and I think that is very, very important. and is a contribution to this debate that I want
No,
to
sure, and I agree with you. The ball is definitely rolling, but it's not rolling fast enough. And I'm not sure. I'm just not sure whether what we've heard is that actually the EU could play. And of course, it's a regulation, but it could play a much stronger role if it wanted to, both in terms of investment, but also creating its own opportunity with space agency CEOs and others about creating some sort of framework which is both about investment, the ecosystem that André talked about, and lead the way. Because it occurs to me it's a no-brainer. When we hear about what's potential and how an easy win it can be, it just doesn't make sense how politically, if why you wouldn't have the president, Ursula and her team Europe just really grabbing this one as a huge, both technological but economic win of gargantuan proportions, actually, if you think about it in terms of global terms. But thank you for your contribution. You wanted to come in?
Hello, yes, my name is Pozzi. I just wanted to share briefly my experience as a venture capitalist. So I'm a private investor in technology. I'm Italian, based in Brussels, and I had to go to California to basically patent a technology which is truly revolutionary. The reason why I'm explaining that is not to talk about our technology, but is to explain that we have a serious problem in Europe with the ecosystem. The question was raised earlier about a problem of infrastructure and culture. And the problem with infrastructure is related to the fact that I was advised to say, well, if we start the company with the idea and we have to patent the idea, it will take twice the time that it does in the US, and it will cost between 50 and 100% more. So we had to basically set up the company in California. It took 3 days. And then our founder moved there, and then within 30 days, we had 25 people on board, the best scientists around, coming from all over the world, all nationalities, all cultures, extremely fast. And then I asked the question, of course, as a co-founder and chairman of the company and investor, I said, can you tell me how it works in terms of, the European mentality about hiring and the contracted indemnities and the notice period? And they said, but there's nothing of all this. It's at will. And I said, what do you mean at will? Of course, you can just stand up and call one of your team members and say, you're fired. And the person goes. And they said, but be careful. It's the other way around as well. Suddenly one of your best scientists stands up and says, I'm gone. And he goes with the whole thing. This is the fluidity of the system. And the other thing is tax alignment. Now, it might sound a bit bizarre, but in reality, all these young talents, they are driven by passion, but also driven by the ability to participate to a success, which obviously leads to a gain in money. And we have a serious problem in Europe because each country has a different taxation system. So we could not put together a team in Europe, whether it was in Brussels or Paris, or because we have different tax systems. And it's a hell of a problem. The last point is also in terms of financing contribution. In the US, it can be very fast. In Europe, it's very complicated. Another point I think it's really important to know, this technology is really revolutionary. Usually, in deep technology, it takes at least between 2 and 3 years to get a patent, if you're lucky. Since the day you've introduced the demand and you have timestamp, it took us 11 days with the US Patent Office because they are much faster and it's a single language and they have all the resources and it's a centralized administration. And then what did they do after they said, aha, this is unique, no prior art, you will get the patent next week. And we received the papers. And then what did they do? They called up Washington and said, you need to talk to these guys. So we were kindly invited to Washington, and I cannot elaborate more, as you can imagine, but it's an integrated system. And what happened in Washington, they said, aha, we want one thing from you guys. We want to check whether you guys are real, as the Americans say. I said, what do you mean we're real? They said, does it work? And they said, can we audit the technology? I said, be our guest, welcome. So after a month, they sent a team of 5 people, audited the whole technology, came back, called us back next month and said, we opened the doors. A single integrated system. I'm based in Brussels. I fly back and forth with California every month before COVID. But when I come back to Brussels, then I go to Paris, then I go to Milan, and then I go to Rome, and then I go to Frankfurt, and then I go to the European Commission, and then I go to European Council, and then I go to Charles Michel, and then I go to Commissioner Vestager, and then I go to Director General, whatever, and nothing comes out. And it's a similarity with AI. We have exactly the same problem in AI. So to end up on space, I have three major concerns. The first one is, unfortunately, very frustrating. We Europeans are extremely good in intellectual work, in moral principles, but to convert that into real results, into creating a real industry and a real platform, we are miles away. Second point, we do have a serious problem because I think it's an infrastructure problem, not only from a financial tax point of view, but from a decision-making point of view. Because at the end of the day, the Commission proposes, the Council decides, but then it becomes a bazaar because then, you know, countries start negotiating, whatever, but we don't have an integrated policy. We're wasting billions and we're losing the race. The US set up a year and a half ago the National Security Council on Artificial Intelligence. Read it, the report is unbelievable, 150 pages. You get the summary online, 15 pages. They are extremely clear on what's happening on artificial intelligence. Europe is nowhere, but we provide the best scientists. I mean, to me, so we are, you know, there's the theory, and we're very rich on theory, and we spend billions and billions, but then in practicalities, we're completely lost, and unfortunately cannot compete. So this is just to share my experience. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that level of optimism and hope about the future of Europe in space.
You need someone. I mean, I'm absolutely free. I'm not a politician. No. I can say things, you know, really catch as we do. You know,
I'm joking.
In the investment market.
I'm so glad you're here.
We have to be straightforward.
No, I'm so glad you're here because we need that kind of front end, you know, venture capitalist, entrepreneur, innovator experience to actually understand why the market doesn't work in the way it should do. But also it occurs to me that you really need to open up you know, an space innovation academy here in Brussels. We'll help you do that because that'd be great because that will be one way of us working with you to create something interesting. But you make some, you know, very important points, but there is this trade-off between speed and values and integrity of process that we may want to think about. So I want to bring in Susmita. You've been desperate to come in.
Yeah, I think it's all very stimulating. I think I'll pick up on where Pierre left off. So I spent 12 years in California, 3 years in Huntington Beach working with Boeing in international business development, and 9 years in San Francisco running my own company. I'll give you a real-world example of a very successful Earth observation company which launches satellites. I will not take any names. So this company was launched around 2009, 2010 in San Francisco. And the beauty of the American system is that hype is part of the business model, and hype doesn't work in older civilizations like Europe and India, where there's a lot of cynicism that what comes in. So this company X raised about 290 million, Series C, right? They launched what they love to call shoebox satellites, which had no altitude control. So the images that came from the satellites were very pretty to look at, but they could not be processed, and they had zero revenues for almost 6 or 7 years. Such a thing wouldn't work in Europe or India. Now, fast forward a little bit, they acquired a company in Germany, a real company with real satellites, with real data where you could make money. So that's when this San Francisco company for the first time had a real customer database and real satellites where you could play with the imagery, commercially speaking. So what I'm trying to tell you here is they could play with venture capital money for 7 years, no revenues, toy satellites, and finally bought a real company with real satellites. And then they acquired another company. Again, I won't give you a name. They were my launch clients. I launched their first satellite on the PSLV. This company had a much smaller constellation, but high definition video and imagery. Again, a real company with real satellites, with real imagery, that became another revenue stream for them. So what I'm trying to tell you here is the venture capitalists I've met in Silicon Valley, they're willing to give that kind of money for 5 years, 7 years, run, play with it. You're not making any money, never mind. So I think just metaphorically, the idea is you jump off the cliff and you grow your wings along the way. So I think Europe has to be ready for that paradigm shift. That is called risk-taking. It's okay to hype a little bit, right? It's okay to not have revenues. But so I think this kind of a mentality, it needs a real mindset shift. Okay. And I think the word culture is a very important one too. So let's not also forget that a lot of things that I've seen in the United States in my 12 years is very wasteful as well. Let's not even forget that, but that makes them competitive, right? It's a wild, wild west. That's their business model.
Fully agree. It's really Wild West, and I see it because obviously I go there with my eyes as European.
Yeah.
And usually, what I heard until GDPR came in, the Americans were saying, this is Euro crap. But then when it came in, suddenly they said, oh, wait a minute, it's going to hit my wallet. This is going to be very expensive. The problem we have, even with GDPR, for example, is that we make one example, two examples, but there's no control afterwards. So we're not coherent neither in the way we apply our own rules. But I get your point, there's a lot of waste, quote unquote, but it's part of the system. The only way you can recycle capital is making sure that you have one big win, but you lose on 19. So that's why I have white hair, by the way. But I mean, it's just a joke, but the system allows for that because the ecosystem works that way, which we do not have in Europe.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for that exchange, a very important exchange. I need to wrap up, so Masami, can I ask you if there's any further reflection you want to share with us before I move to Anna and then to Josef for the last words?
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Hello?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I have thoughts on the ecosystem that was pointed out many times. And in Japan, around these 10 years, we've had a change in the way we structure our priorities. Not so much about the order, but it comes as security, commercial, industry, commercial, and then science, exploration, technology. And this was completely the other way around before, say, 2008-ish. And we had a transition there. And I think this has made a complete difference in framing the Japanese ecosystem. And I really think this topic is very relevant in when we talk about SDM, commercial partnership, net zero, of course. All of this has a very different, we can shed very different light when we have this ecosystem view in developing, and our budget has increased. And I think this is the best time, really the best time in at least my life that I've experienced in space. It's so exciting. We have all these problems, but that's great. We have problems to solve, and we have a government to turn over, so to say. So I think it's really exciting, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you for your optimism and putting a bit of happiness into this debate. That's much needed. Thank you, and thank you for joining us so early in the morning from over there. Anna.
Yes, a few words. I think sometimes in Europe, maybe I'm wrong, but I think we're trying to find the one size fits all. We look at the regulations and things like that. And that's a problem because, as I talked about before, it's totally different if we're going to Jupiter or if we're going to make a satellite for constellation. And here we have to have some adjustment because I think the speed is too slow in Europe in general. And there we have really to improve. And also for the sustainability of the infrastructure in space, I would say that space is the infrastructure of the Earth. And we have to take care of that. And I think the challenge is that, and I'm sorry to say that I think we're going to need to have a real disaster in space before everyone really see that this is really important for us to do this together. Because we have one resources, and if you do something, you destroy for yourself and for all the other ones. So I think, I'm sorry to say, but I think that's the case.
I think you're right. We don't seem to learn because it's adversity or crisis that makes us wake up and do something. Josef.
Well, thank you. I really like what the gentleman was saying there before about the US and the experience between Europe and the US. And I can only thank you for putting it black and white on the table. We have a problem in Europe. We have a serious problem in terms of speed and access to money. These are the two main things where we are certainly behind Silicon Valley and other places in Europe. In fact, in this document I mentioned before called Agenda 25, I raised 3 elements to succeed in commercialization which we would like to implement in Europe. One is talent, and I think talent, Europe is lucky enough, we have plenty. We have excellent minds and brains. Some of the best ideas come from Europe. Talent we have, but access to money and time are our weaknesses, and there we need to work on. Access to money, as you know perfectly well, more than 60% of all venture capital money in the world is along one strip in Silicon Valley. And it is very easy to convince somebody with a bit of hype to give them money to start up some activity. Europe needs to speed up on this part as well and organize the access to money. There's money in Europe, plenty, but it's not organized in the same way, and we need to really work on that. And this is one of the priorities I put in ESA also as part of my agenda. And the third one, you mentioned it very clearly, is speed. Decision-making, speed, organizing ourselves, simplifying procedures, cutting the crap, as some people would say it, to make sure that we are getting much faster and can proceed much more swift from an idea towards implementation. And this is a cultural issue, is a regulatory issue, is an issue between countries and so on. But certainly we have to work on this at several levels. And ESA, I'm trying within the limits which we have to implement programs that are much faster. We have introduced, and my chair lady of ESA Council would witness some of the elements which we are introducing, but I'm determined to reduce time across the spectrum. Decision time, implementation time, contract review time of satellites when they are being built. It's a multifaceted thing. There's not only one single element to improve, but certainly work on all dimensions. And I'm very happy that my chair lady of the ESA Council is saying that we are too slow in Europe. Yes, we are. And I will come back with real proposals to my member states and to you, Anna, to really propose elements how we can speed up this process. But it is needed. I can only agree to you. And I'm very happy you raised that, because this is a bottleneck. And if we want to succeed, yes, we need more money, I agree, but also other things need to change.
Joseph, thank you very much. Thank you all. We're over time. I've again eaten into your lunchtime. I do apologize, but I hope you agree. This has been fascinating, thought-provoking, depressing on occasion because of what we already know, but lots of opportunity and hope if we do the right thing. So Susmita and others, I'd like to thank you all for being in this conversation. And if those of you, sorry, if they're being quiet, you need to be quiet too. So thank you all, but if those of you who wish to know more about our Making Space Matter program, please get in touch. It's fledgling. We only launched it this year in partnership with ESA, and we share the same kind of, I suppose, ambition. And from our potential perspective, it's about creating the right intellectual conditions, but also policy thinking to move this agenda forward with this help and support, but also to influence politicians and others around this as much as we can. So if you're interested in it, please get in touch. We're going to be having another very effective conversation, I hope, in the autumn, in November. So if you're interested in that, please get in touch. Thank you all. And I think this is going to go great. I wish you luck, Joseph, in terms of what your April summit. I hope that February summit, and I hope that some of our European young leaders, as I've mentioned before, who have an interest in this, can be kind of somehow intertwined in this conversation. And I know I'm going to leave you with a bit of teaser with a gentleman who I'm going to embarrass here, Witzer, who's on this table here, who is the CEO and founder of Sea Rangers, has a brilliant idea to create young space rangers. I'm not going to ask you to speak about it, but I'm going to make sure people are teased about it, and we'll share it with you in particular. But there you have the kind of innovation potential in Europe, as you say, but hopefully it can be scaled up and given some life and breath. Thank you all. Go and have your lunch. We're going to start again at 2 o'clock, where upstairs we're going to be talking about digital, and down here we're going to be talking about health. See you all in about 50 minutes or so. Thank you very much.